All right, so here in the front of my truck, the first thing that I want to do is check the front of my vehicle, and then we're going to go under the hood. But I want to check the very topmost part of my vehicle, and that's my light bar for this particular vehicle. But I want to check my light bar, make sure it's mounted properly. From what I can see here, it appears to be fine. I work my way on down to my clearance lights, make sure those clearance light lenses are intact, nothing's broken there. Work my way down, I look at my mirror mounts from each side. From what I can tell here, and I'll have a chance to check them closer later on, but what I can see here, they look great. Windshield is intact. I don't see any cracks from here. Again, I'll check that a little closer later. Looking at my seal around my windshield, make sure we've got a good seal. It's not going to leak on us. The body, as far as the hood's concerned, I want to look both sides there. It looks like it's sitting down like it should in the closed position. It's latched on both sides. I want to look at my lights on both sides. I want to look at my grill. Again, I'm working my way down here, left, kind of top to bottom, left to right. So I'm looking at my lights on the sides here, on the front. Make sure my horns are mounted, make sure nothing's going to fall off. Working my way down, looking at my headlight assemblies. Again, looking at my grill, just working my way down, level by level. Look back here at my bumper. My siren boxes, just anything that I come across here that could potentially not be mounted correctly, I want to look at and confirm it. I want to step back off the truck just a little bit once I've worked my way all the way down, and I want to make sure that I don't have any leaks under the vehicle. At this point, we're going to raise the hood and go under and do our engine check. Okay, we're going to do the pre-trip inspection on a tractor and trailer. This is for those of you in the fire department. This is Hazmat 72. We test with this truck for fire and police primarily. The police department, generally speaking, for the bomb trucks. We can test on this truck and both the bomb trucks. With testing here, you can drive both of those bomb trucks. We don't really test on the bomb trucks. We test on this, and that gets you good to go on anything that the police department's got. So gives us a lot of flexibility. This truck actually has a sister, Hazmat 71. They're basically the same truck. 71's red, this one's white. Outside of that, they're about the same truck, same wheelbases. This is a little bit newer truck, but other than that, they're pretty much the same. So if you're seeing one, you're seeing the other. And I'll mention a couple of things about the other truck as we go, but generally they're pretty much the same. So we're going to go under the hood and start our pre-trip inspection there. All right, so I generally start on the passenger side, and then I'll work my way back around to the driver's side. And once we've done that, we'll put the hood back down, check the front of the vehicle, and then on around we go. So on this side, there's a lot of things to check. There's a couple of critical pieces that we want to make sure that we check, and I'll talk about those. But generally, what we want to do is start up here at the top of the engine compartment, work our way down all the way to the ground, kind of a top to bottom, inside to out, left to right type of a deal. That way we don't miss anything. We don't want to jump around a bunch, because if we do, we're going to start missing stuff. On this side, the first thing we check up here on the top of the engine, we've got a hose coming from our water pump to the radiator. So that's a good indicator of the location of our water pump. Our hose here comes out of the radiator into the water pump, into the side of the block basically, but the water pump's kind of made into our engine block. There's not a lot to check on the water pump because we really can't see much of it other than this inlet. So we just want to look here, make sure we don't have any leaks on either end of that hose, or any hose for that matter, but specifically looking here at the water pump, again, right in here inside of the block. Want to make sure we look on the side of the block, no water leaks. Listen for any water leak, any drips, drops hitting anything else. It gives us a good idea. So the water pump, again, a big piece of our safety equipment. We got to circulate water, keep the engine cool, so that's one of our big issues. Right down here, as we move our way down, we have our alternator. So we want to make sure that the alternator we can actually put our hand on it, try to shake it, make sure that it's mounted correctly. We'll look on the back side of the alternator back here. make sure that we don't have any frayed wires, make sure that our wire connections are like they should be. Look at our belt in here. And again, I'm trying to stay out of the camera view there, so I'm just going to point there, but we'll take our hand, make sure that that belt's good and tight. We don't want to have any excessive play on our belt for our alternator there. So alternator and water pump on this side. Our primary safety issues, we want to make sure we can cool, want to make sure we have electrical power on the vehicle. Everything else here, it's not that it's not important, but everything else is accessory. We have air cleaner, that's certainly important, but we can have a dirty air filter and still get down the road. We can't survive without water to cool and electric to run our vehicle. So having said that, we're going to check all that other stuff. We're going to look at our air cleaner. We're going to make sure that all these connections are the way they should be. We're going to look at our intakes. We've got some turbo components. We want to look at all of our connections. We want to look at anything that's here, but I'll point out some specific safety issues as we go. Again, just kind of working down, looking top to bottom, left to right. I want to work all the way down. I got my windshield washer fluid there. I've got a really good way to check that. I can see through that reservoir there. This makes it easy to check. I come on down, look at my frame, look at all of my other components down to the bottom, and then we're going to switch over to the other side of the engine compartment. All right, so now we're on the driver's side of our engine compartment. Same thing, we want to start at the top, work our way down. So the topmost piece here on this side, we're looking at our coolant reservoir. So just like what we talked about on the other side, we gotta have coolant. So we want to make sure that we check. The good thing here is you can see through the reservoir. So you don't have to take the caps off. If you couldn't see through the reservoir, you'd obviously have to remove the cap, but you'd want to do that when the engine's cool. Some of these have, if you can't see through them, a lot of them have steel reservoirs for the coolant, so they'll have a sight glass a lot of times. This one is, again, it's opaque. You can see right through it, so makes it easier for us to check. As we work our way on down, I got the engine oil dipstick, so I'm gonna pull that dipstick, check my engine oil level. Right behind it is my engine oil filler. We've got a transmission dipstick back here on the other side, or toward the back of the engine block. So again, anything that has a way for us to check a fluid, we want to do that. Working our way on down, you see the power steering fluid reservoir here. You take the cap off and pull the dipstick. Again, we have an opaque reservoir, so we can see right through it. It's not necessary to take the cap off. We can check it without doing that. For any of these, we want to make sure that we don't have any leaks. We want to make sure, again, that these reservoirs are coolant, engine oil, power steering fluid there. Want to make sure that those reservoirs, those dipsticks, make sure that everything's mounted correctly. Make sure that we don't have any leaks, anything coming out that's going to create any issues for long-term leakages and cause us a problem going down the road. Again, a number of different things here that we see that we can check. One thing toward the back, and again, working our way back toward the back side of the engine compartment here, is our air compressor. So you see your air compressor there for our braking system. So we've got a air compressor. It's kind of like a T-shaped, so it's tall, but it also comes down, and it's a T-shaped, kind of an upside down T for our air compressor. So again, one of those critical pieces. If we don't have an air compressor, we don't have a way to build air, then we're in trouble. So that's a huge safety issue for us there. So just to kind of recap on those big safety issues and those things that we really want to pay close attention to. On the other side, alternator and water pump. On this side, our coolant, our engine oil, power steering fluid, our air compressor there. And we've got some good ways to check those things. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. Again, tons and tons of things that we can check in here. We've got all kinds of electrical connections, all kinds of hoses, all kinds of different things. We want to look at everything. Want to give a good check on everything. But those 6 major safety issues that I mentioned are things that we really want to pay close attention to. All right, so we've got some electrical connections up here. Again, lights that we can check, all kinds of different things as we work our way on down here to the frame. Again, looking at our frame, it's another good opportunity to check our frame. We are going to have several opportunities to do that as we work through the pre-trip here, but this is a good opportunity to do that. All right, so having checked our engine compartment, we want to keep working on down and check our some other critical pieces. We'll try not to step in front of the camera, but you see here you have your steering arm. Your steering linkage actually starts with the steering wheel. It comes through the firewall, so you have your steering arm here that comes down into your steering gearbox. We want to check that steering arm, make sure we don't have any excessive play. We can actually reach up and turn that steering arm, and you can see your steering wheel moving up there. So we can feel if we have any excessive play. That's a good way to check play. We can actually check that again on the inside. Okay, so then steering arm comes into your steering gearbox. And you see you have hoses coming out of your power steering reservoir that we checked earlier. You want to check any connection for your fluid, make sure we don't have any leaks. Check that steering gearbox again. I can reach in here, grab a hold of it, make sure it's mounted properly. You have what's called a pitman arm here. It comes off the steering gearbox, goes into your drag link. Again, all this is linkage. It's not terribly important that you remember terminology on this piece. Just make sure that you understand all that's linkage. It all needs to be checked for damage. It all needs to be checked to make sure that it's properly assembled, connected properly. Your drag link goes back to your spindle, and that's how you actually turn the wheels. So again, critical piece there that we want to make sure that we're checking. So we're working our way all the way down to our axle. Again, we've looked at our frame, feel really good about my frame. So now what I want to do as I work my way out right here at the axle, I'm going to look at my suspension, my braking system, and my wheels and tires. These are three systems on every axle that we want to make sure that we're checking. So on this particular truck, we've got a spring suspension system. You can see air suspension systems. Typically on a truck this style right here, you're going to see spring suspension on the front. You may see an airbag just for comfort. Generally, you'll see airbags on your drive axles, trailer axles, that kind of thing. So this is very common to see. What I want to look at for my suspension here, I want to look at my front hanger, which is here, and then I have a rear hanger, which we actually can't see. But I would have to actually look up under the truck. But you got a hanger here that your leaf spring is connected to. So I want to look at my hanger, make sure it's secured to the frame properly, and then coming on down, make sure that my hanger is actually capturing my spring there, and I got a good connection there. I want to look at my springs themselves to make sure that I don't have any broken springs, any missing springs, that kind of thing. And then I want to look over here at my U-bolt. Got my pointer here on the U-bolt. The U-bolt actually takes and marries the axle itself to the springs. So I want to make sure that I have a good connection there. And then the fourth component here is my shock absorber. All right, so I've got four components: hanger, spring, U-bolt, and my shock absorber for my suspension. That's the same thing on every single axle. We'll look at it again on these other axles, but just remember there's four things on your suspension. So from here we're going to move to our braking system. We also have four things on the braking system, so we'll look at those as we go. Here we've got our hose. We've actually got an air hose and an electrical line that's going into our chamber. So we want to make sure that those hoses and lines are not frayed. I want to look at them. I want to listen real close, make sure I don't have an air leak there. Those two pieces go right here into my chamber. So my chamber is really nothing but a spring. So inside this chamber housing is just a big spring. So when I apply pressure with my foot brake from the inside, the spring pressure actuates a push rod here. So I'm going to put my pointer here right on top of the push rod where it comes out of the chamber. So what I want to do as a driver, I want to look at that push rod coming out of the chamber, and this entire assembly here from the push rod out of the chamber through here to this connection, and then I have another push rod that goes into this assembly. All of that is called my slack adjuster. So so far I've checked my hoses and lines, my chamber, and then my slack adjuster. I want to look at all of those pieces for damage, make sure that they're mounted correctly, and I'll actually want to put my hand on the slack adjuster here to make sure that I don't have any slack. If I do have slack, I'll take it in there to the mechanic, have them to adjust it to the proper tolerance. That's not something as a driver that I'm going to do, but I do want to check to make sure that I don't have any slack. As a driver, I don't want any slack. The CDL manual will actually tell you that up to 1 inch of slack is acceptable. As a driver, I don't want any slack in there. I'm going to have the mechanic check that out. The fourth component on my brake system is my drum. So from the slack adjuster, I've got another linkage where a shaft is going in there to the inside of my drum. There's an S-cam system that actually expands the shoes on a drum style, and it actually creates the friction that stops the vehicle. So the fourth component there is my drum. So to recap, hoses and lines, chamber, slack adjuster, the push rods, the connections, everything for my slack adjuster, and then my drum. I'm checking my drum for a good drum lining. I want to make sure that the inside lining where the shoes actually contact, I got a good surface there, make sure it's not pitted or anything. I really have to climb in there and look at it. Make sure that drum's not cracked. I don't have any deformities on my drum. All right, so as I'm in there looking at my drum, I also want to look at the inside of my rim. Okay, so, or wheel, you may call it a wheel, rim. So I want to look at the inside of the rim to make sure we can look at the outside here as well. I want to make sure that that rim's not cracked, make sure that that rim hasn't been welded. So just, again, same thing we're looking at as everything else, make sure that we don't have any damage. So as I'm working my way out, I've looked at my rim. I want to look at the inside sidewall of my tire, make sure that there's no damage on the inside sidewall. I'm going to look at the outside sidewall when I get out here as well. But as I'm working my way out, I'm looking at my tread depth. Minimum tread depth for a steer tire is 4/32 of an inch. So we want to make sure that we have adequate tread depth. These are practically brand new tires, so they have well more than 4/32 of an inch. But minimum 4/32 on steer tires. Everything else, drive tires, trailers, all that are 2/32, but 4/32 minimum on steers. Need to remember that. And then our outer sidewall, make sure I don't have any damage. So on that tire, I'm looking to make sure also that it's inflated. The CDL manual requires that I have a mallet, so I want to have a mallet with me as I'm doing my check so that I can sound my tires. I can listen for the appropriate sound on them. I can take a gauge and check them as well, but at a minimum I need to sound them with a mallet to make sure that I've got proper inflation. So damage, inflation, and tread depth are things that I'm really looking hard for on my tires and wheels there. So on the outside of my rim here, I want to make sure that I don't have any, don't have any damage, don't have any cracks, that wheel's not been welded. On this particular truck, we've got some wheel covers. If I'm a really good driver, really conscientious, I'll take all my wheel covers off. For the purposes of the video, we're just going to take one off. But I want to look for cracked lugs. I want to look for cracked lug nuts. A good idea, especially if you have wheel covers, is to look down in there, make sure you don't have any rust, any residue for rust. That's indicative of a crack. Rust trails where the water will get in those cracks and it'll run down the side of your wheel. Those are good indications that you've got a cracked lug or a cracked lug nut. So I want to check all of my lug nuts. And then again, if I'm a real good conscientious driver, I'm going to pop that cover off there and check my oil seal, my hub oil seal. This one's got a cover on there, so I'd have to get me a tool to take that off and look at that. The good thing is, if you've got a seal that's leaking, it'll sling grease all over the place, so it'll even sling it out behind here. So if you're a little bit lazy like I am and you don't want to take that cover off, at least look for grease at residue around your cap there. Preferably, we want to take that cap off and look at our hub oil seal, make sure. A lot of them have a cover, a clear cover, where you can actually see the fluid in there. So checking our hub oil seal. So just to recap here on our wheels and tires, tire, rim, lug nut, and your seal are the four things on your tires and wheel assembly there. So remember the rule of fours for our suspension, brakes, and wheels and tires. Rule of fours: spring hanger, spring, U-bolts, and shock absorbers is my four things on the suspension. On my brakes, lines, chamber, slack adjuster, and drum for my brakes. And then the four things on my wheel and tire assembly are my tire, my rim, lug nuts, and my seal. Okay, so I've gotten done with my front axle, with my engine compartment, got my hood back down so that on a windy day it doesn't slam back down on me. Go ahead and put that back. So I'm looking right here from here back because I'm finished up front here. So I want to look at my my door here. I've looked at my mirror from a distance, but now I'm right here up on it. I want to make sure my mirror is mounted correctly, make sure the glass in my mirror is not broken. I want to look at my vent window here for my door, make sure that my glass is intact, make sure to roll up, roll down. Can even check my, my locking mechanism for my door. I want to make sure my door looks good, mounted correctly. Handle, same thing with this door. Check everything that I checked on that one. So I'm working my way down, top to bottom, left to right, all of my handles, make sure everything opens and closes correctly. Lights that are mounted here. I want to look at anything that I have there on the side. All right, so working my way down. And you see I took my glove off here, so I never want to with greasy gloves, I never want to grab my handles there, so I always want to check that with a clean hand. So as I work my way down, checking just different things here. I've got a shore power connection here. Again, checking for damage, just like I did on everything else. I'm gonna check my step. So I got a number of things here in the driver's area that I really need to concentrate on, but generally just making sure everything at first here, making sure everything's mounted properly. So as I work my way down, and then I'm gonna work from left to right, I've got my diesel exhaust fluid tank here. I wanna make sure that cap is secure. I wanna make sure the step, along with the fuel tank, all of this is mounted together. So if I kind of grab the frame of all of this, the supports and everything, kind of press on my tanks to make sure all of that's secure. I want to make sure it's not going to create problems going down the road. Again, I got a step integrated into there. The step itself I want to make sure is secure. Make sure that my caps are tight on these tanks. Make sure that I step back, look under the tanks, make sure that they're not leaking under there. So that gives me a good broad view up under my driver's door compartment, up under the middle part of my cab here. As I work my way back around, I'm just going to kind of stay here and look at my toolbox that I've got mounted here on the side. You know, if you're checking a truck that doesn't have a toolbox, you know, obviously you're not going to have this type of deal, but you may have something else mounted here. There could be a hydraulic pump, there could be, you know, what they call a wet line, it could be for a dump bed. You could have anything mounted here. If it's here, you need to check it. For this deal here, we would just want to make sure it's mounted correctly. If there's anything liquid stored in it, electrical stored in it, make sure that nothing's leaking, make sure that I don't have frayed electrical wires. This is a good opportunity for me to check my fire extinguisher, one of my safety equipment. It's in the green there. I got wheel chocks that I've already deployed some other wheel chocks, but I got some spare wheel chocks here. Actually, I have in this box here, I've also got my reflective triangles, which is another part of my safety equipment. Those things are actually generally kept in the cab. On this truck, there's really not a good storage place, so the driver here elected to keep them in this outside storage box. The third piece of safety equipment that I would want to make sure that I had was spare fuses. Those are generally kept in the fuse box, in some spare slots, in some dummy slots. So those are my three safety pieces of equipment. Again, we'll talk about that when we get in the cab. I'll reiterate that, but those are some pieces here that we can go ahead and check. All right, so this box is mounted good. I feel good about that. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this back. Okay, make sure the door's secure. All right, so then I'm just gonna work my way on back. While I'm right here, I want to go ahead and just knock all of this stuff out. Go ahead and get these things taken care of. So I got my battery box here. This particular truck has an external boost port here where I can hook up some jumper cables without having to hook to the batteries. That's nice. A lot of newer trucks have that. So you got 3 batteries here. Biggest thing here is I just want to look, make sure that my battery box, this whole assembly is mounted correctly to the frame. Make sure that none of my batteries are leaking. I don't want to have any battery acid on top of the batteries. I don't want to have any kind of fluid laying down in my tray there. I want to make sure that my connections look good, no frayed wires. I want to smell it. Again, if I don't see any fluid, I feel good about getting a little bit closer and smelling. I'm actually not smelling for any kind of acid leak or anything like that. I'm really more smelling for a burning smell. If I've had any wires that may be burnt, anything like that. So I want to check and make sure that we don't have a problem there. All right, so feel good about that. Batteries are secure, so I'll go ahead and replace my battery box cover. Okay, I'm gonna check, make sure it's good and secure. It's not gonna fall off going down the road on me. Okay. All right, so at this point, before I go to my axle, I want to go back to the back side of the cab here, and then I want to work my way back down in the center of my truck. Which again, I want to kind of check this as I came to it, but I want to look at everything in the center of my truck. Back up here on the top of the back of the cab, again, I want to kind of compartmentalize these pieces here. So I'm just going to work down toward the middle, looking at my spotlights for some work lights there on the back of my cab. I got two there. They look to be mounted appropriately. We'll check them later. Lenses are good, no busted lenses, just like I checked on my other lenses. I've got two reflectors there. Got one on each side here. That's a DOT requirement. So if you have reflectors on your truck, make sure your reflectors are reflecting the way that they should. Make sure they're not faded out. You want to make sure that they're in good shape. Those look really well. So working on down, I got a handle there that I've got all my hose springs mounted to. That looks to be mounted properly. I've got a pull handle there for climbing up on the back. I want to make sure that we've got that got this good and secure. So I'm just working my way on down here. I've got a hydraulically powered generator that's mounted here on the catwalk. I want to look at my generator. I'm not really going to check it in my pre-trip because that's really not a part of going down the road, but I do want to make sure that everything on it is secure. It's got a little catwalk here. I can check, make sure the generator itself, just kind of push on it, make sure it's not loose, make sure it's not going to come off. So it's actually mounted to the catwalk. The catwalk is nothing more than a platform for you to stand on that's mounted on top of the frame rails, and that's so you can stand up here and do your thing. Your generator's kind of in the way here, so this manufacturer kind of extended our catwalk out a little bit. So we want to make sure that all this area where we can step is not going to create any problems for us. Again, we'll check the generator later. That's really not a part of my pre-trip. That's something that's really used more on scene, so it's not really a safety issue for going down the road, but I'll check it later as a part of some more checks that I'll do. So as I work my way on down, I want to look at my brake lines. So I've got two hard piped brake lines here. I've got an emergency line that's red. I've got a service line that's blue. So I want to make sure that I look at those, make sure my connections are good here, listen for any air leaks there. I feel pretty good there. Also, before I leave here, I want to check my electrical line. This is for your DOT lights, for your turn signals, brake lights, those kinds of things that's going to the trailer. So the tractor supplies the trailer for those types of things. All right, so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to kind of flip over and I'm going to follow those lines, because those three things, my service and emergency for air and then my electrical line, are my safety issues. All the other stuff that you see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 more hoses. Some of them are air, some of them are electrical. There's a lot of different things. Those certainly matter, but for a safety factor, for going down the road, for operating the vehicle safely, where I want to put my concentration is on these two brake lines, the red and the blue, and then on that electrical line, because those are the ones that are going to help me stop and go. And that are going to get my warning devices. This other stuff is for peripheral accessory type stuff, for emergency lights, for things like the lighting in the back office area. That stuff certainly matters, but really what I want to check on that other stuff is just to make sure it's not going to flop around going down the road. My concentration needs to be on my blue and my red lines there, as well as my electrical line. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to climb up here, and we're going to look at what exactly do we need to check on those air and electrical. So what I want to do, I got to be careful on this one because I'm kind of getting off my catwalk. Need to be careful, but I got a lot of things I can hang on to up here. So what I want to do is I actually want to take loose my air and electrical stuff here. So I got my emergency line here, my red line, and I want to make sure that I've got a good gasket on. This is called a glad hand. This whole assembly is called a glad hand. So I've got a good gasket. You can see that it's labeled with an E for emergency. If you happen to be colorblind, you may not be able to see that red. So it's got an E for emergency, and the trailer's actually got a tag right there. I'm wiggling it. I don't know how good we can see it on the video, but it actually is spelled out. It says emergency. So it's a kind of a triplicated way to communicate which line's which for folks who are colorblind, and we've actually had some folks that really came in handy for. So I want to take my red and my blue line off and look at both of those, make sure my gaskets are intact, make sure I've got a good connection for both my air lines. Same thing with my electrical. Look at it, make sure it's in good shape, follow it all the way down. Looks good. It's about brand new, I think. So that one's in good shape. Got some good pieces and parts here. Take my blue off, look at my gasket in on the trailer glad hand and my tractor glad hand. I'm gonna put my DOT line or my electrical line back in there. Make sure I got a good connection. I'll check those lights later. We'll check the brakes later. But again, right now we're looking for damage. Okay. While I'm up here, I want to go ahead and look at some of those accessory pieces that we talked about. Again, those don't really have a lot to do with me going up and down the road, but I want to make sure that they're not going to fall off and create problems for me going down the road. So this is a good opportunity for me to kind of finish out my tractor. All right, so while I'm up here, I want to look at my frame again. I can see the other side of my frame. I can see my cross members down there. I can look straight down in here and I can see my drive shaft. I can see my drive shaft. It's actually back right there. That's my drive shaft. Okay. So I want to make sure, as best I can see it, I can't see a whole lot of it, but it's not bent. It's obviously not damaged. So I want to just make sure I do the best I can from what I can see up here. I can actually lean a little bit forward. I can see where it's going into my differential, and I feel really good about that. So what I've done here in the middle is I've went all the way to the ground, basically. And I'm going to look for leaks on the ground, that kind of thing. Frame, drive shaft, check my catwalk up here, checked everything in the middle. So I've kind of knocked out my whole tractor. From the side to the interior, everything right here in the middle. So while I'm here, I also want to look at the front of my trailer. Now we got a little bit to do on the tractor yet, but it's all axle stuff. So while I'm up here, this is a great time to kind of jump to my trailer. I don't like jumping around, but while I'm here, it makes sense to go ahead and do it. So what I want to do, anything that's mounted to the front of the trailer, I've got clearance lights here. I can check those lenses, make sure that everything that's mounted is in good shape, not going to fall off, no cracked lenses, that kind of thing. I've checked all my connections here. Did that just a few minutes ago. I can check my door locks. I'll check that again in a few minutes. So I'll also want to look at the front of my trailer. Structurally, how does the front of my trailer look? If it was a flatbed, sometimes they'll call it a header board or a bulkhead. This is a little bit different, but this still is a structural piece of my trailer. So I want to make sure that it's in good working order for me. Okay, so what we've done is basically worked our way down here. The next logical thing for me to look at is my fender guards here. Got a kind of an upside down mud flap, but it keeps things from getting slung into the back of the cab. So call them fenders, call them guards, whatever, but we want to check to make sure that they're mounted correctly. And at this point, I've knocked everything out. I've done my whole cab, even the back, the middle, all the way to the ground. I've even got my trailer, so I've worked all the way to the ground here. So I'm done from here up. Now, I need to run under my tractor here. I don't want to forget. I need to go on under my front of my trailer here and totally finish out my tractor. So what we're going to do is we're going to first talk about how the tractor hooks to the trailer. That's the first thing that we want to do. The first thing that I want to check here, you see where this is about a 1/4 inch piece of flat steel, and it is mounted here to the front, kind of on the lip of my trailer here on the front, and it kind of rolls around. That's just a piece of angle, piece of channel, and then it's got that 1/4 inch piece of flat steel, and it's the width of this area here. It goes all the way to there. What that is that's a skid plate basically for my fifth wheel plate that's mounted to my tractor to kind of get up under the trailer and pick it up without structurally damaging my trailer. So that's a very important part of our connection piece between the tractor and the trailer. So that's where I want to start, and that's called my apron. So that 2.5 or so foot wide piece of 1/4 inch flat steel, it goes all the way to about right here, all the way up under there. It goes a fair ways back. It's the same width all the way back that you see there. It goes all the way back, and it just provides a smooth skid surface for the two pieces to meet there, the tractor and the trailer. So the next thing we want to look at, we want to actually go under here and look at some of our components for our fifth wheel connection. Okay, so again, you can see how far our apron comes all the way to here. That's a 1/4 inch piece of flat steel and it's mounted to the trailer, you can see. It's actually welded to the frame of the trailer. So that's our apron, and we want to check that to make sure it doesn't have any deformities in it, because we want to have a good skid surface for our fifth wheel plate. So in the center of our apron, welded structurally to the trailer, is our kingpin. All right, so the kingpin is about a 2.5 inch round solid steel pin that when our fifth wheel plate on our tractor, when we come under the trailer, we move back here, there's a mechanism inside this fifth wheel plate that grabs a hold of that kingpin. When it does, that's how we pull the trailer down the road. It actually is being pulled by the kingpin. So what I want to make sure here, one, I want to get all the way back in here, and I'll try to point to this as best I can, and I want to look right straight in here where my broomstick is. I want to look in there and make sure that my locking mechanism is actually around my kingpin. All right, so right in there is where our kingpin is actually in the center of our fifth wheel plate, and you can see the locking mechanism wrapped around the kingpin. Okay, so I've visually crawled up in there and I've checked to make sure that my kingpin is locked in with my locking mechanism that is again here in the middle of my fifth wheel plate. So as I work my way on down, I want to look at my fifth wheel plate again, make sure, and I'm going to point out from here, all this whole piece right here is my fifth wheel plate. So I want to make sure that where it connects here to what's called my platform, this long piece of angle that you see bolted to the frame, that's called the platform. So I want to make sure that my fifth wheel plate, where it anchors in to my platform, don't have any deformities there, no cracks, nothing out of place, no deformities. I want to look up here at my release arm. You can see I've actually got my release arm. I got my broom handle inside the release arm there. So that actually is how we disconnect. So when I pull back under this trailer, my release arm should be out. When my kingpin hits the locking mechanism, it's spring loaded. When it hits the locking mechanism, that release arm is going to go in to the position that you see it in right here. So I can look at my release arm and I know that my kingpin is locked, but I always want to come back here and visually inspect that to confirm it. So working my way down again, release arm here, make sure that it's in, looking at my kingpin and my locking mechanism, looking at my fifth wheel plate. Also, again, back up here to my apron, I visualize my kingpin back here. All of this is a part, those are the individual parts of my locking mechanism. So I need to check all of that and make sure that all of it's connected. A big piece here that I want to make sure that I don't have any daylight between the tractor. You see here, this is the bottommost part of my trailer. This is the topmost part of my tractor. I want to make sure I don't have any daylight in there. If I have any daylight in there at all, then that kingpin is not actually connected properly. It's connected properly when I can visualize it and when I confirm that I don't have any daylight in there. While I'm back here, I'm going to look again back in here. I've got some lights down in here between my frame rails so that if I'm not pulling a trailer, I still have brake lights, I have a backup light, turn signals, that kind of thing. I want to check that in here while I'm here. This is a great time to look at my frame again. I can see a lot of my frame right here. So while I'm in here, I want to take advantage of this time. I can look at my trailer frame, I can look at my tractor frame, a lot of things that I can do. I'm sitting here leaned up against my mud flap. Why not check it while I'm here? So a lot of things I can do while I'm in here. I can spin around and look at my landing gear on my trailer. So I got my feet for my landing gear. I got my legs for my landing gear, and we'll look in just a few minutes at actually how to hook up and make sure that that's going to move correctly. All right. Okay, so before we leave the tractor, I want to make sure that we continue on down. So we've gotten front to back. Now we want to work our way down. We want to go from top to bottom, making sure that we don't miss anything. The biggest thing that we have left here is our axle components. So there's three main systems on my axle. And the first thing that we're going to check is my suspension. So we've got a front suspension hanger here. There'll be one in front of the axle that looks just like it. So then you got your leaf springs here. So just like we had on the front, we've got leaf spring suspension here. So we've got a hanger, front and rear, and then we have our leaf springs that go between those two hangers. I want to make sure that all of that's mounted correctly, make sure that my springs are not missing, make sure they're not cracked, no deformities there. If I have a shock absorber under here, I want to look for my shock absorber. And then my fourth item is my U-bolt. Again, we can't see it from here. We actually have to climb in there to look. But just like we saw on the front, it's obviously going to be bigger here because this is the drive axle. But we still have a U-bolt, just like we saw on the front, that actually wraps the axle and makes the connection between the suspension and the axle. So four things there: hangers, springs, U-bolts, and shock absorber. The next thing I want to look at is my braking system. So I got my pointer right here on my chamber, and again, we're not gonna crawl back up under the truck for the sake of the video. It's the exact same thing as we had on the front. We've got a hose and a line, electrical line and an air hose coming to that chamber. The chamber's bigger here, but it's the exact same thing. Okay, so from my suspension, I've moved to my brakes. So just to recap, our hoses and lines into our chamber. Through the chamber, we have a large spring, obviously, that we can't see. But then there's a push rod that comes out to our slack adjuster, and then we're going to check our drum. So those four components there, we want to make sure that we're checking that. Again, for the sake of time on the video here, we're not going to film that again. It's the exact same thing that you had on the front axle. It's just a little bit bigger here, and it's actually mounted upside down. So don't let that throw you when you do your pre-trip. Just get used to your truck, and that'll make plenty of sense for you. All right, so while I'm in there checking that, on the back side of my wheel and tire, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm in there looking at my drum anyway. So I want to check the inside of my rim on that inside tire, make sure that I don't have any damage, make sure that there's no welds on that rim. And then I'm gonna work my way out and look at my sidewall on the inner tire. Work my way out here, look at my tread depth on my inner tire, sidewall here, between those two tires. I want to check the spacing between my two tires. I want to look down right in between my tires, and I want to look at those rims. I want to look at the rims where they butt up to each other. They're called Budd, B-U-D-D, Budd style wheels. So I want to make sure that I don't have any daylight, don't have any gap whatsoever between those two wheels. They should actually look like one piece. They're actually two pieces, but they should look like one because there should be no daylight in between there. So I want to make sure that my spacing, make sure that my tires are not touching. Underinflated tires potentially could bulge enough to touch. If they touch going down the road, they could create enough friction there to actually start a fire, and we don't want that. So we want to make sure we have good spacing. Again, checking the sidewalls of both tires as we come by. Want to make sure that we're looking at tread depth on both of our tires. Again, these are brand new tires, so we've got really good tread depth. So we're looking here at a minimum of 230 seconds. Remember, this is a drive axle. This is a pulling axle, so it has a minimum tread depth requirement of 230 seconds. Steers is 430 seconds, but drives like this and trailer tires are a minimum of 230 seconds. Okay, so I'm looking for damage, I'm looking for tread depth, I'm looking for inflation. I got to check both my tires. Again, I need a mallet where I can sound both of them and make sure that they're properly inflated. I'm looking for damage, looking for my proper tread depth, both tires. Got to make sure we check both tires. So I'm working my way on out here to the outside wall of this outer tire, and I've got I got a good looking tire. Again, they're brand new, so I'm gonna work my way in here and look at my rim, make sure that I don't have any damage to my rim. And again, I've checked inside, I've checked between the rims where they butt up to each other. Now I'm checking the outside. Also, again, I want to look at my lug nuts here. I want to take my covers off, check my lug nuts. Again, make sure I don't have any cracked lugs, cracked lug nuts. Looking for those rust trails where the water gets in those cracks and you'll see a trail of rust. So I want to make sure I'm looking at that, my lug nuts and my lug studs as well. Again, I want to take this cap off and be able to check that axle seal. If I have a bad leak, I'll see axle grease slung out from behind that cap, but I want to make sure I take that cap off and check my axle grease there. Okay, so to recap on this axle, suspension, brakes, wheels and tires. Remember the 4 things on each one. Suspension is hangers, springs, U-bolts, and shock absorber. Brakes is my hose and line, chamber, slack adjuster, and the drum. And then the 4 things on my wheels and tires are my tire, my rim, my lug nut, and my seal. Okay? I want to take it one step farther, and on my tire I want to look at inflation, tread depth, and damage. Okay? So remember that rule of 4s. Just make sure you check a couple extra things on your tires, but remember that rule of 4s for every single axle that you do, and you're going to be in good shape. Okay? So before I leave this area, I want to look again real good, check my connection, check my frame, I check my axle assemblies, I've checked my flaps front and back, I've looked in here at my trailer frame, my tractor frame, I looked at my landing gear. I feel in pretty good shape. Before I leave this, the last thing I want to do is look at my landing gear. I've got a little holder in there. So I want to make sure my landing gear will actually work. So I want to just give it a couple of rounds, and it's moving good. I'll put it back where it was. Stow my got to do it right. Stow my handle back where it belongs, and we're ready to proceed on our the rest of our pre-trip. My tractor's done, front of my trailer's done, underside of the front of my trailer's done. So I'm ready to kind of back away here and kind of look at what I haven't checked and what's left. So really, what I've got left on my trailer, because I've already done the front, from here back is now where I want to concentrate. So what I want to do, first thing I have here up at the top, all the way across the top, I got some lights there, some scene lights. I want to make sure I don't have any cracked lenses, make sure that the housing for the lights are not damaged, make sure they're not hanging off the side of my trailer. Working my way down, I've got about 6 doors here. So I've got a handle up here, make sure my doors will open and shut, make sure they'll lock back. Okay, so I feel good there. If one will open and close and lock, they'll pretty much all do it. So once I have them locked here, I just want to go through, again with a clean hand, go through, make sure my doors are latched, make sure all of them secure, not going to give me any problems going down the road. All right, so again, just working my way down. I've got a big awning here that comes out for shade, for rain, that kind of thing. I don't necessarily need to deploy my awning. I just need to make sure that it's going to work for me going down the road. So I'm going to check my support in the front, my support in the back, so I feel good coming on down my trailer. So I'm looking at the whole side of the trailer here, front to back. I'm just working my way down left to right. So as I work my levels down, I've got a step here. Make sure it'll deploy correctly. make sure that it'll stow correctly, not come out going down the road. That's so I can access the top part of this compartment. I got a step here, I've got a light, making sure all of these things are in good working order. They're not gonna cause me any problems going down the road. I'm just gonna systematically work down my truck. Pay close attention to the bottom there, your reflector. You got DOT reflector, tape all the way down the bottom, the whole rail on the bottom and on this mid rail here. You wanna make sure that DOT tape is intact, make sure it's not faded, make sure it's not coming off. That's a requirement for trailers. So any marker light, again, your reflectors and things like that, you want to check and make sure. So I've pretty much worked my way all the way down. So I'm working my way back. I'm gonna look at anything that I've got mounted to the side of the truck. I'm gonna look at this axle here in just a minute, but I want to kind of finish the side of my trailer. Then I'll knock that axle out, and then I'll be done completely with the side. So coming back here, looking at my glass on the side of my office area back there. Again, the reflector tape, that kind of thing. I feel really good. I've checked my again my rear awning support. Feel really good. I've checked the entire side of my trailer. So I'm gonna go ahead and knock this axle out. Again, we've already checked 2 axles. So for the sake of the timing on the video, we're not going to go back over this axle. But I will say this, for those of you who will actually drive this truck and you'll actually be performing pre-trip inspections, this trailer does not have a spring suspension. It's got an airbag suspension, but there's really not a lot of difference. You have an airbag instead of a spring. You have a top mounting bracket in lieu of a hanger, and you have a bottom mounting bracket in lieu of a hanger as far as in comparison to a spring suspension. So you have the same pieces, they just look a little bit differently. So you still have hangers, you still have a spring, it's just in the form of an airbag. And you still have shock absorbers back here. So you still have your components, you still have the U-bolt that mounts those hangers to the axle itself. So you still have your 4 things. Your brakes are identical to what you saw on the drive axle and the steer axle. Again, they're mounted a little bit differently, but you still have your 4 components, your hoses, your lines, and then your chamber, slack adjuster, and your drum. Everything's the same there, so we don't really need to go back over that. Same thing as we talked about on our drive axle, your tires, your rims, your lug nuts, and your seal. Just make sure you're checking that. Again, 2 30-second tread depth on those tires. Everything that we talked about to check on the rest of those axle components. On the other 2 axles, same thing applies here. Just make sure you don't miss this axle. It's easy to kind of bebop down the side of your trailer and you just zoom right by the axle. Make sure you check your axle. That's your trailer axle. You want to make sure this is the only axle that's under the trailer on this particular one. It's a single axle trailer, so it's extremely important for our safety for going down the road. All right, so we're gonna finish out that axle just like we did on the other ones. Then we've finished the entire side of the trailer. We're ready to check the back of the truck. We're gonna check the back of the truck just like we did the front of the truck. So I'm gonna take my glove off because I need to open that door. So same thing as we checked on the front of the truck as on the back here. We're gonna start at the top. We're gonna check the air conditioner housing up there. Looks good, it's mounted. I can climb up there and check it. I'm gonna check my clearance lights there on top of my arrow stick. I'll check my arrow stick, make sure all of those lenses on any of those lights are not broken. I'm gonna check all of my peripheral mounted stuff, my tripod lights, all of my scene lights, lenses. Is it mounted correctly? My lenses are not cracked. Just working my way from top to bottom, left to right. Look at my glass on my doors here. I'm gonna open my doors. Make sure they open and close correctly. Make sure that they latch correctly, make sure they're secure. Working my way on down here. I want to make sure my license tag light, little lens there is intact. All my lights here, lenses, reflectors, remember your reflectors. Make sure all my lights are intact there, no cracked lenses, reflector there. I can stand on it, I can mash on it, make sure that my bumper is good, it's mounted correctly. That's a big step. It's carrying a lot of weight for people coming in and out. I'm gonna look under my trailer to make sure that I don't have any leaks, no wires hanging down, those kinds of things. Okay? So we're gonna move around to this side. And generally, and again, for the sake of the video, we're not gonna beat this thing in the ground. For the sake of the video, we're going to check everything on this side that we checked on the other side. We're going to do the same thing on the axles. We're going to check everything on the side of the trailer. We're still in the pre-trip mode here. We're still going to check everything. But what I'm going to concentrate here on for the rest of the video down the side here on the outside portion is things that are unique to this side. So there's a couple of things that are unique to this side of the truck. So we're going to work our way on down here. Again, we've got some of the same components as we come on down. There's only a couple of things, and for this truck, the primary thing is our exhaust, and it's extremely hard to see. But right here between my toolbox and my fuel tank, I've got where the exhaust pipe is. I can follow it. I can kind of follow it down through here and see where it comes out. Extremely hard to see, but I want to visualize it. I want to look as best that I can, and I can take my pointer and kind of try to move it a little bit, my broomstick, just to make sure it's good and tight and make sure it's mounted properly. But I want to make sure it's on this side of the truck, not on the other side. So that's really the only unique thing to this side of the truck. Outside of that, though, I'm going to check everything over here that I checked on the other side. We're not going to be redundant and do it all over again for the sake of the video. But during your pre-trip, just again, you just wrap around the side of the truck. You're going to keep checking just like you were on the passenger side as well. So that concludes, again, unless there's anything if you're doing a check on another vehicle, you just want to make sure that you check everything and really concentrate on the things that are unique to this side. So we're going to go inside the cab next and do our interior check. Okay, so before we go into the interior, again, I want to reiterate the safety equipment that's required for the cab of the vehicle. This particular truck, because it's an emergency vehicle, so it's designed a little bit differently interior, there's not a really good place for the fire extinguisher for the triangles, so they are in this compartment here. If you're not testing, or excuse me, if you're not doing a pre-trip on this particular vehicle, if you're operating another vehicle, you need to be looking for that extinguisher, your reflective triangles, and also spare fuses. Generally, on a newer vehicle like this, your spare fuses will actually be in the fuse box in some dummy slots. If that's not the case, you'll need to have some spare fuses in the cab to carry with you. So those are your three emergency pieces that you need to make sure that are in your cab. So we want to point those out before we get into the operation of the truck on the interior. So now we're going to go inside the cab. Okay, so we're going to check pretty much everything in here, just like we did on the outside. If we've got it, we're going to check it. But there's a couple things that we need to do. The first thing we want to do is check our lights. For the sake of the video and the timing, we're not actually going to demonstrate light checks. Our employees know how to check lights, so we're not going to belabor that point. But I am going to go ahead and power the vehicle on. So I've got a master switch over here in the floorboard. So I've got master power. Before I crank the vehicle, I want to perform what's called a safe start. So basically what that means is I want to confirm, let's turn the radio down. I want to confirm that my brakes are engaged, my parking brakes are set, and I'm going to put very, very light pressure on the foot pedal to make sure, for certain sure, that I don't have any way for the vehicle to move. I'm going to go ahead and turn just ignition power. I'm not going to fire the vehicle yet, but I'm just going to turn on ignition power and confirm that my transmission is not in a forward or reverse gear, and it's in neutral. Okay, so I've got my brakes set, I got my transmission in neutral, I got my very light pressure on my foot brake. So I feel good that I don't really have any way for the vehicle to move. I've got my wheels chocked, so that really completes my safe start process. So I'm gonna go ahead and fire the vehicle up. All right, so that we don't have a lot of background noise, we'll try to eliminate as much as we can. So my engine cranked appropriately. I don't have any faults on my gauge panel. So what I want to do now is just look in general on the interior, I'm doing a couple of things here by having the engine running. One, I can check my lights with an assistant. I'll have to have an assistant to do that. But I'll check my lights. I can make sure that my gauges are coming up. I've got appropriate pressures. I've got appropriate tolerances on my gauges. So while that's all happening and we're building air and so forth, I'm gonna look across the top of the vehicle. I've got overhead consoles, pockets, you know, all kinds of things that could fall out on my lap going down the road. I've got my visors up here. I wanna make sure that they're secure. Not going to create any problems for me. I've got things mounted to the dash. I just want to look in general and make sure all this overhead stuff is secure, not going to cause me any problems. Looking at my dashboard, just working my way on down here. Looking at my windshield from the inside. I looked at it from the outside, but I'm going to look at it from the inside here. I can see my wipers from the inside as well. Look at those, I can inspect those wiper arms. I can look at my blades. I'm actually going to turn them on here in just a second. So just again, working my way from top to bottom, working my way down to my dash. Once I get down to my dash, now what I want to do is look at my instrument panel. That's the natural progression, working my way down. So I'm going to look at my instrument panel, and what I want to do is I want to start over here at the left side of the instrument panel, and I'm going to work all the way over. That way I don't miss anything. Okay, so what I have first here is I have my speed control for my cruise control, but that also acts as a high idle. So I'm going to check that, make sure that it works, and it does. Works great. So look at my lighting indicators. I'm actually inside of an enclosed building here, so I can actually check to make sure my lights, I can check my high and low beams without the need of an assistant to make sure that they're going to function correctly. So those are all my switches over here on the left-hand side. I want to start working across my gauge panel here. So I need to look at each one of my gauges. The first thing here in the upper left is my oil gauge. I've got the appropriate oil pressure. My water temperature is climbing like I expect it to. I want to keep an eye on that and make sure it doesn't go too high. Got transmission temperature here. It's beginning to climb as well. My RPMs, or excuse me, my tachometer. So I give it a little bit of acceleration to make sure my tachometer is responding appropriately. My speedometer, obviously I'll have to be on the road to check that, but I've got my lights and everything, my backlights on all those gauges that I can see on my speedometer. My fuel gauge, also my diesel exhaust fluid gauge here on the right. And then I've got two air gauges. We'll come back to our air gauges in just a minute. But this vehicle has two air gauges, one for my primary system, one for my secondary system. Both of those are building the appropriate pressure, so I feel good there. We'll talk about those again in a minute. I'm gonna keep working my way on across. If you want to stop here and talk about your steering wheel, that's fine. It's kind of in the middle of everything we've talked about. First thing I want to look at is my four-way flashers up here on the top left. I want to turn my windshield wipers on, make sure that they function appropriately. I've got a button out here for my washer. I don't want to get this truck dirty for my fellas that let me borrow it, so I'm not going to spray water. But I've got a button here. I check my washer. I've already checked my high and low beams there. Just want to make sure I don't have anything else on my steering column here. Good there. So I want to make sure that my steering wheel, I don't have any excessive play. Remember when we were under the hood, we checked for excessive play and we didn't have any out there. I don't have any here either. When I move it, the tires move. I feel good. I don't have any excessive play. I check my horn, make sure that I've got got a good horn. We actually have a way to do the truck horn and the air horn all in one button, so that's a pretty nice feature. I've got a tilt mechanism here that's actually foot operated right under the dash, so I'll make sure that that's going to give me the appropriate adjustment that I need. All right, so working my way on across here, I'm just going to keep going. So I'm down here at this level. I'm going to keep on going. I've got an auxiliary trailer brake where I can actually restrict air pressure to the trailer. We'll talk about that again in a minute when we do some air brake checks. Again, my selector, we hit on that just a few minutes ago in my safe start, but I've got a selector here where I can make sure that I can go to the appropriate gear. So let's go ahead and do that. Go into reverse. I can also check to make sure that my backup alarms are working. So I'm gonna go back to neutral before I go to a forward gear, and I feel it shifting into my forward gear. So my selector is working appropriately. I can actually change gears, okay? So we've got a marker interrupt, and that's basically kind of like a thank you switch. It cuts off all of your marker lights on your tractor and your trailer. So that's working properly. I can see my lighting indicators in here, and I can actually see my trailer lights going out. Mirror heat, again, anything that we have here, we want to make sure that we're checking here. Have a regen switch. That's for a whole nother class. But you do have a regen switch for your exhaust system, where you can actually clean the particulate filter. We're not going to go into that. But I want to make sure that switch is, we're not going to do that during a pre-trip. That's a long drawn out process, and it really only needs to be done on an as needed basis. So I'm not really going to worry about that during my pre-trip, unless my regen light up here on my dash came on, and it's not on, so I'm not going to worry about it. My utility lamps on the back of my cab that we talked about, that's where I can check that. Again, the mirror heat. I've got some traction control switches here. I can change from air horn to my regular horn. I just got a lot of other different things. My engine brake, again, I'm gonna have to be on the road to check that. I'm gonna have to be on the road to check my traction control, those kinds of things. But just anything, any switch that I have here, anything that I have mounted, I want to make sure that I've got make sure that I'm doing those checks. All right. One thing that I want to do before I leave my dashboard, I want to look at my parking brake here. I'm going to go ahead and do a parking brake check. There's a number of different brake checks that we're going to do on here. This quite simply is a parking brake check. So what I want to do, I've got my tractor released, but I want to keep my trailer engaged. So my parking brakes are actually applied to my trailer, but they're not to my tractor, and I'm gonna put my transmission in a forward gear, and I'm gonna pull against that trailer. Give it a little bit of acceleration. You can see on the video it's moving back and forth, but we're pulling against that trailer, and those trailer brakes are holding. That's checking the trailer brakes, but that's also checking to make sure that my tractor and my trailer are connected. So that's really good. So now I'm gonna do just the opposite. I'm gonna engage my tractor brakes, and I'm gonna let my trailer brakes loose so that I can independently check my parking brake on my tractor. And you can feel it, and you can see the tractor moving. I'm pulling against my tractor parking brakes, and they're not moving either. The reason I let my trailer brakes loose there is because if my tractor brakes weren't holding like they were supposed to, I may be feeling that my trailer brakes are holding, so I don't even want them in the equation. I can pull against only my tractor brake. So I've done that. I feel really good about my parking brakes on both tractor and trailer. So I'll set them back, let that air build back up a little bit as I finish my checks. Down here on the bottom side, below all my switches, below my radio and all that, I want to check my heat and defrost controls. I'm going to do my cameraman a favor and help him cool off and put my air conditioning on. But what I really want to concentrate here is heat and defrost. DOT really doesn't care if we have an air conditioner. They just want to make sure we have a heater and a defroster so that we can get ice off in the wintertime. Air conditioning is actually a luxury. It's not something that's required. However, a functioning heater and defroster is. All right, so we've checked everything down across our dashboard. So we're ready to go all the way to the floor. And over here, the only other thing that we have, and we've checked, so a couple of different things here. I just want to make sure I've applied my foot brake a number of times already. I've applied the accelerator a number of times, so I feel good that those pedals are functioning properly. They're not loose. They're not going to have any problems going down the road. So there's really nothing more than some siren and air horn switches in the floor. We need to check that, but again, those are kind of aftermarket. Those are specialty stuff for fire trucks, not necessarily safety issues on the DMV side. All right, so we're going to finish out our check-in here. As always, we want to make sure that our seat belts are functioning. Of course, going down the road, we want to have them, but before we go down the road, check your seat belts, make sure that they're going to latch, make sure that they're going to fit you as a driver, and make sure that all your passengers are going to be fitted properly with their seat belts. Anything that's mounted here in between the seats, make sure that it's functioning. We've got radios, computers, all of that stuff. None of this is important for going down the road. It's important for the fire truck, but as far as going down the road safely, this has nothing to do with any of that. But having said that, we just want to make sure that it's not going to give us any problem either. We want to make sure it's mounted correctly. If we go around a turn, none of this is going to come over here and cause us any problems. Everything back here, anything that's loose, we want to make sure is tied down. We want to make sure that all of our back seats are secure, seat belts, anything in the floorboard back there is secure like it should be. Okay, so checked pretty much everything in our cab, all the way to the floor, from the ceiling to the floor, left to right. So the last thing that we want to do is do our air brake system check. Now, we've checked our parking brakes, but we haven't checked our air brake system. So we want to make sure that we do that. So what I'm going to do, so that I can hear really well, I want to be able to hear during this test as well. So what I want to do is I actually want to cut the vehicle off. Okay, but I want to turn my ignition switch back to the first power notch there. I don't want to crank the vehicle back. I just want to turn it back to where I've got power. And I do have power here. I've got to have power for this part of the check, because I need to check an alarm that's an electric, it's an audible alarm, so I need to have power. The other thing I need is an open air system. So I'm going to open my system by releasing my brakes. So I'm opening those valves, I'm letting air exchange from the tanks all the way through the brake system. The entire air system from a braking standpoint is open. All right, so there's three things that I need to check. All right, so I have an open air system, I have my electrical systems on. So there's three parts of this braking system check that I have to do. The first is a leak test. So with an open system, I need to put very slight pressure on my foot pedal. So you'll hear it as I apply pressure, very light pressure, and I'm going to watch my air gauges. My primary and my secondary system, I've got pressure against the whole system. The system's open, and by applying foot pressure, I put pressure on all the components of the system. So I'm watching these two gauges, and the maximum allowable loss is 4 PSI in 1 minute. That's for a combination vehicle. If this was a single vehicle and not a tractor and trailer, I would only be allowed 3 PSI. But for this test, we're allowed 4 PSI because of the addition of the trailer. So I'm looking at those two gauges. I've not lost anything. I'm gonna lose a little bit of air when I apply foot pressure, but once it stabilizes and I begin to look at that over that 1 minute period, I've not lost anything. So I don't have any leaks. My truck has passed the first part of my air system check, my brake system check, and that's the leak test. The next is the alarm test, and you'll hear an alarm here, and basically what that's telling us is that the switch is on and the key's in the ignition without the engine being running, but that's not the alarm that we're looking for. It'll be obvious when it comes on. So what I'm doing is I'm looking in the gauge panel here, and I'm looking for a visual alarm. So I'll see the visual come up here, and I'm listening for another alarm besides what you already hear. I'm looking for an audible and a visual alarm. So what I have to do is I have to get air off the system, because this is a low air pressure alarm. I've checked for my leaks, now I'm looking for my alarm. So I have to get air off the system. So I begin to fan my foot brake to get air off my system, and you see that my visual alarm came on right around 60 PSI. It should be followed up just almost immediately with an audible alarm, and it did. And I got another visual as well. So that's good. I've got two visual alarms here as well as my audible alarm. That should happen somewhere 40, 50, 60 PSI, and the first one we got was right at 60. So I feel really good about that. My truck has passed the leak test. Now it's passed the alarm test, and now what I'm looking for is these two buttons to pop out. So that's the third test, is the button test. They pop out at about 25 to 30 PSI, and that is actually where your braking system locks down because it doesn't have any air pressure. It's totally locking the vehicle down under spring pressure, not air pressure, but that is a redundancy so that the vehicle doesn't roll off when it loses air. So we're looking for those to pop out. So I got to fan more air off my system. At about 25 to 30 PSI, we should see them pop out. And there they go. The trailer popped. I'm not sure that the tractor popped, so I'm gonna keep going, and there it did. So if I have any questions about it, I can make sure that they popped out. I visually saw them both. So I feel really good about that. Following the leak alarm and button test, I'm gonna go ahead and crank the vehicle back up, build that air pressure back up, so that I can move on to the rest of my pre-trip inspection. That concludes the interior portion Again, there's a lot of other things. You can check your lights if you haven't already done that. You can walk around your vehicle again with it running, just listening for air leaks, looking for anything else while the vehicle's running. A lot of different things that you can do there is a good idea. But that concludes our pre-trip inspection for the truck here.